Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a really potent political idea. It's something called externalization.
Right. It's this tactic where governments facing maybe serious internal problems try to, turn that failure into some kind of external crisis instead.
A distraction, essentially. It's a known playbook, but our source today suggests it's playing out right now in the Horn of Africa with potentially dangerous results.
Yeah, it's a high-stakes situation.
Okay, so let's focus in. We're centering this whole discussion on one specific analysis. It's an editorial from ET News 24. The title is Exporting Crisis, Masking Collapse, Ethiopia's Dangerous Game of Externalization. It's quite pointed.
It really is. And it makes a very bold claim about what's happening in Ethiopian politics right now.
Which is?
Well, it argues that this intense focus by the leadership on getting sovereign access to the sea, it's the key phrase, isn't really about long-term strategy.
Okay. So what is it about, according to them?
It's about political survival. They argue it's basically an escape route from domestic problems.
All right, so that's the mission for you, the listener. We're going to break down why this editorial makes that claim. Why do they see this sea access push as a domestic diversion?
Exactly. And it's crucial to state up front, this is a very critical piece. It's one perspective, and we're not endorsing it, just exploring the argument they lay out.
Got it.
To really get the argument, though, you need to understand what sovereign access to the sea means for Ethiopia. It's not just logistics.
No, it's huge, isn't it? Since Eritrea became independent back in 93, Ethiopia has been landlocked.
Precisely. And for a major country, being landlocked is always tough, economically, psychologically. But for Ethiopia, it's become this real emotional flashpoint. It's loaded with history and nationalism.
And the editorial seems to use that very historical weight, that pain, in its argument. So let's get into their main thesis. You could call it failure externalized. The ET News 24 piece basically says Ethiopia's recent talk follows a troubling playbook. The government is, according to them, deliberately trying to export internal failure as foreign crisis.
It's presented as a conscious strategy, a deflection tactic to stay afloat politically.
And the editorial is quite specific about why this tactic is supposedly needed now, isn't it?
Yes, very. The authors detail the internal pressures they believe the Prosperity Party leadership is under. These aren't small things.
What are they highlighting?
Okay, so they list three main converging issues. First, serious ongoing economic stagnation. That's hitting people hard.
Right.
Second, these deep-seated ethnic fractures that seem to be worsening or at least resurfacing, threatening unity.
Okay, economic woes, ethnic tension.
And third, the natural consequence, growing public unhappiness, discontent with the government's ability to actually solve these problems.
So connecting the dots, why turn outwards? Why externalize? These problems sound like they need domestic solutions.
Well, that's exactly the editorial's point. Fixing the economy, healing ethnic divides that requires tough, maybe unpopular internal reforms. Structural changes, it's hard work.
And potentially politically costly.
Very costly. But focusing on the myth of sovereign access to the sea, that's different.
How so?
The authors argue it's, cheaper politically. It creates an immediate sense of national unity, a common goal, maybe even a common enemy if needed. It redirects anger.
So it sidesteps the paralysis they see internally.
That's the claim, which is why they use such strong phrasing. They say this fixation isn't strategy, it's escapism, cloaked in nationalist rhetoric.
Escapism, that's a powerful word. Implies there's no real strategic benefit, just pure distraction.
That's certainly the editorial's framing.
So if the goal is diversion, you need to put on a performance, right? A show. This brings us to what the editorial calls the theater of distraction.
Yes, they outline the specific mechanisms. They see it as a calculated theater.
And what does this theater involve?
Well, it's not subtle stuff. We're talking fiery speeches, the kind of broadcast widely to stir up national feeling.
Okay.
Then there's these very formal-looking letters sent to the United Nations. High profile.
Right, making it seem like official diplomatic action.
Exactly. And also engaging in what the editorial somewhat dismissively calls strategic dialogue with the UN or other regional players. It all looks very active and serious on the surface.
But the editorial argues it's mostly for show, aimed inwards.
Primarily, yes. Those UN letters, for example. The piece suggests they're less about actual diplomacy and more like props. They signal to the Ethiopian public, look, we're fighting for you on the world stage against these external challenges.
So the purpose of all this drama, according to the source?
Simple and quite cynical, according to them. Shift public anger outwards. Target a population they describe as weary and desperate for hope.
Take that frustration over, say, the economy or local conflicts,
and channel it into nationalist fervor, redirect it towards an external goal or grievance. The authors basically claim the leadership is weaponizing nationalism for political survival.
Okay, but let me push back slightly here. We're focusing on the idea that it's purely escapism. But isn't foreign policy always complex? Even if a leader is facing domestic pressure, couldn't an external focus still have some strategic logic, even a secondary one?
That's a fair point. It's rarely ever just one single thing in geopolitics.
Is the editorial maybe oversimplifying by saying there's zero strategic thought behind it?
Well, the authors would likely argue that while, yes, any foreign policy move has implications, the primary driver here, the dominant motivation, is domestic political need.
So the strategic rationale is just the convenient justification.
That's what they're suggesting. And their evidence for this interpretation is partly historical context. They issue a pretty stark warning.
Which is?
That the Horn of Africa has seen this play before. Yeah. They argue this pattern, internal problems getting repackaged as external crises, it always ends badly.
With what results?
Instability, loss, and ultimately disillusionment. History doesn't repeat exactly, but the dynamics can be similar.
That really sets up the next part, the regional impact. Once you externalize your internal problems, they inevitably spill over. And this is where the editorial really zooms in on Eritrea.
Very sharply.
They make a really pointed claim. It is not Eritrea that seeks conflict. It is those who cannot control the storms within their own borders. That's direct.
Extremely direct. It's designed to frame the situation as entirely one-sided in terms of provocation.
So how do they portray Eritrea's stance?
As the complete opposite. The editorial describes Eritrea's posture using words like calm, principled, and unprovoked.
So painting Asmara as restrained in the face of provocative rhetoric from Addis Ababa.
That's the picture, yes. Deliberate restraint. They even mention reports that President Isaias Afwerki explicitly stated Eritrea has no territorial ambitions, no appetite for war.
Implying Eritrea is just trying not to get dragged into Ethiopia's internal drama?
That's the implication, that Eritrea sees it as a distraction campaign and wants no part of it.
And didn't the editorial mention a specific warning attributed to President Afwerki?
It did. A very direct quote, reportedly aimed at the Ethiopian leadership. Do not plunge your people into a futile war, focused on solving your real problems.
Wow. That quote basically sums up the editorial's entire argument, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It encapsulates their thesis perfectly. Solve your internal issues first.
So beyond the rhetoric, what does the editorial see as the immediate cost of this externalization for the region, even if war doesn't break out?
Well, the damage starts immediately, according to them. Trust erodes. Diplomacy becomes harder, maybe impossible.
How so?
The whole region, they argue, effectively becomes hostage to one nation's political insecurities. Instead of countries working together on shared challenges which the Horn desperately needs, you get rising suspicion, simmering tensions. Diplomatic energy gets wasted managing this manufactured crisis.
So it poisons the well for cooperation?
Exactly. It's a net loss for everyone, the authors contend, because the focus shifts away from mutual benefit towards managing perceived threats.
It sounds like, in their view, the domestic problem isn't just ignored, it's actively allowed to metastasize across borders.
Sure.
Which brings us to their final conclusion. They make a plea, don't they?
Yes, a direct plea to the international community. The world must not be deceived.
Don't buy the narrative.
Essentially, yes. They hammer home their main point again. This whole access to the sea push isn't a genuine geopolitical need driving policy.
It's what again?
A domestic diversion. A cover-up for failures at home. They're telling foreign governments, treat this as political theater, not strategic reality.
And they have some pretty memorable final lines to drive this home.
They do. Very stinging lines, like, the loudest cries of sovereignty often come from those who have lost it within.
Implying a lack of internal control undermines external claims.
Precisely. If you can't manage your own house, your claims about national rights ring hollow. That's the implication.
What else?
They follow with a very clear statement. Peace is not built on propaganda. A direct shot at the rhetoric.
And the ultimate diagnosis.
That Ethiopia's real challenge is itself. Its internal governance problems. Not Eritrea, not geography.
And this ties back to the diplomatic efforts, the UN letters and speeches we talked about.
Yes, perfectly. The editorial dismisses them almost contemptuously. It says those letters to the UN, they'll just remain inked illusions of legitimacy.
Because the intent behind them is, in their view, fundamentally dishonest.
Exactly. If the motive is diversion, the diplomacy itself is hollow. meaningless, they suggest.
Okay, so let's distill this down for you, the listener. What's the key takeaway from digging into this specific editorial? It seems to be about spotting this playbook, this externalization tactic.
Right. How do you tell the difference? When is a foreign policy crisis genuine, and when might it be, as this piece argues, a calculated diversion?
And the editorial suggests looking for alignment, right? When does a sudden, intense focus on an external issue, often framed in very nationalist, existential terms, perfectly coincide with internal stress reaching a boiling point?
That's the potential red flag they're waving. When the domestic situation gets really tough, the external rhetoric might become disproportionately loud and urgent. That, according to this analysis, could be the signal.
The smoke signal of diversion.
Yeah, And looking beyond this specific case, this single editorial about the Horn of Africa prompts a bigger, maybe more provocative question for you to think about.
Go on.
If internal political failure, deep problems like economic crisis or ethnic strife, can't just be washed away by the sea, if external adventures don't actually fix them, what are the real, lasting consequences of deliberately framing those internal issues as external threats?
You mean the damage done by choosing conflict over reform?
Exactly. The editorial warns about instability, but there's a deeper cost. It's the choice itself. We've seen historical examples where leaders facing trouble at home suddenly launch external campaigns that go the Falklands War and Argentina's internal situation at the time, or maybe some Cold War proxy conflicts.
So the danger isn't just the conflict itself.
It's the deliberate substitution of external conflict for necessary, difficult internal work. That's the potential self-sabotage this specific editorial is really warning against. Something to consider when watching any nation navigate difficult times.